Hello, I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. This is the third episode of the series of videos that will go through a lot of my blueprints. I'm using a separate save that I call my Blueprint Playground. This has every advanced game setting turned on, making this effectively creative mode. I want to show off how these are made in case you want to make your own or edit these ones to fit your needs. In the last episode, I covered the blueprints for foundries and assemblers. Today, I'm going to go over the other two input machine, refineries. These blueprints are free to use, and the link to the Google Drive is in the description. So let's take a look at these blueprints. With refineries, there are just endless possibilities on how to do these blueprints and how to configure them, and just so many options, which is great. It can also be a little overwhelming, so I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. So these blueprints are aimed to be pretty flexible. Pretty much all of these are going to have both the inputs in here. So with the recipes, if you kind of scroll through all of them, you'll notice right here is the cost, right? And this is going to be the output. So with residual fuel, it only has a liquid in and a liquid out. Same with a number of the other recipes. But you won't find any that are just a solid input. That's not a thing for refineries. So I left it with both of these. So if you are going to do a recipe that only deals with a fluid for the input, my suggestion would be load up the blueprint, come in here, and then just delete these. And then you're just left with this. If you want to make it more compact, then you could just very easily move this in. Probably 2 meters would be my guess. Okay, take it back. You can move it up quite a bit. So if you wanted to make this very compact and you didn't have the solid input, you can make this quite a bit closer. Now I like to give things space, so if it were me, I would probably just delete them and leave it as is. So you won't need to use the dual input and dual output until the later parts of the game. Mainly, I believe, with the aluminum products, it uses both inputs and outputs quite a bit. But if I was only going to have an output of solids, I don't necessarily need it to be raised up this high. I may just want it right on the ground. So that's why I made 3 different versions. But with refineries, I'm rarely only using 2 or 4 refineries at a time. So a lot of the times what I like to use is these as just a base blueprint. So I'm going to load these up. I'm going to set the recipe for whatever I want. This also allows me to set the clock speed, because a lot of the times what I want to do is match clock speed with the next step of the process. So since heavy oil residue often leads into fuel, I like to keep things as simple as possible. So if I'm able to, I'll use the same amount of refineries to make heavy oil residue as I do the fuel, and then I'll just be able to connect a straight pipe. Now the amounts aren't always the same. So with something like the diluted packaged fuel, which I've used a lot in my load balance playthrough, this needs heavy oil residue at a rate of 30. But when you make the heavy oil residue, it outputs at 40. So I could group the machines 3 at a time here and 4 at a time for the diluted packaged fuel. Or I could just place a few more machines and I could underclock these to 30. Then I can just pair the refineries 1-to-1 for each step. So for something like that, I would end up loading up this blueprint, saving the recipe and the clock speed at what I want. And then for that specific example, I would end up just deleting these. So that way, when I save the blueprint for the diluted packaged fuel, I would delete the input, and then I would just manually connect the two with a straight pipe. Probably best just to show the example really quick. So for the heavy oil residue and diluted packaged fuel example, we're going to load up our 2 input, 2 output blueprint. I don't need the solid input, so I can just go ahead and delete these. I like to color coordinate my pipes, so I'm just going to color these black. For the recipe, I'm going to select heavy oil residue, and instead of an output of 40, I just want these to output at 30. So we'll Control C, Control V. As far as the outputs go, we have both the heavy oil residue and the polymer resin. So I can go ahead and delete the pipe. I usually color my refineries the color of the product they're making. So these are making heavy oil residue. And then I can go ahead and save this with a new name. This is making our heavy oil residue. And now we can clear it. Let's do the other half. So for the diluted packaged fuel recipe, we're going to select the 2 refineries, 2 input, fluid out, because we don't have to deal with a solid output. I can go ahead and change this to orange because we're outputting fuel. I do need the input for this one since this recipe needs packaged water. And this recipe needs the 30 heavy oil residue, so I can just Control C, Control V, and this is set. We can change the color to the refineries. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete these pipes. And there we go. That's all I needed to change. And now we can go ahead and change the name. Save blueprint. Let me show you how they fit together. First, we'll take the heavy oil residue blueprint. And then I can hold down E to bring up the radial menu and switch to my diluted packaged fuel blueprint. Now, something like this, because I have both the polymer resin to deal with and the inputs for the packaged water, I would probably give this even more space. But for this example, this is how it would go. So you just want to line them up so that they are directly in line with each other. And then I'm just going to take my pipe and I'm just going to connect the 2 blueprints. And this way, I don't have to deal with any of the junctions. I don't have to worry about merging and splitting, any of the issues that come with that. It's just a nice straight shot, and then there's just less to go wrong. And that's how I would modify these fairly generic blueprints. But let's just get this out of the way for now. And let me show you the 3 blueprints. And here we have the 3 refinery blueprints. So these ones are obviously a little bit tighter together. They do still have a 1 meter gap between them. So in placing these next to each other, if you hold down Control or use the blueprint mode, you can snap them together and you'll see kind of the difference right here. So right here, they're really close together. But in between the blueprint, they've got a little bit of a gap. So we're just going to move that over by 1 meter, and then the spacing is the same. And that's how you would place a line of them, just like this. I went ahead and did the same thing where I have the 3 different blueprints for the 3 different outputs. Since these have 3 machines, and if you were going to put them in a large row like I normally end up doing with the refineries, these are Mark II power poles so that they have enough connections to be able to connect to both sides. And the difference is just the outputs between these 3. And just like with the 2 refinery blueprints, I would just delete the solid if you don't need the solid input and resave it with the correct recipes. By default, they're just blank. So to join up a whole bunch of these blueprints, it's pretty easy. So what I like to do is when I place the blueprint for the first time, what I'm trying to do is line up the inputs or outputs. It's exactly a 4x4 for the 3 refinery blueprints. So I want these right on the edge of the foundation because it just makes everything really easy. So that's what I did over here. So since these are right on the edge, that means that the next splitter just needed to be on this side. And then the one after that is going to be right on this side of this foundation. So knowing where it's going to go along this line, I just need to find kind of the center in between each group of blueprints. So instead of picking the exact middle, I like to pick the middle between the 2 lifts. It just helps make things even more symmetrical. but really you could place it wherever you like. And then this one goes in the middle of these ones. And there you go. Obviously, load balancing isn't the same for pipes as it is belts. However, I do still like to lay it out like this because it does have the advantage of all of the machines receiving the fluids at almost the exact same time, instead of one filling up and then the next and then the next and the next. So even though it doesn't work nearly the same as with belts, because belts are just much more consistent, it still has the same advantage and benefits of doing it this way. So those blueprints cover the large majority of recipes that I use. However, I am going to include 2 more blueprints which I find super useful, and that's for alumina. So the first one is the sloppy alumina alt recipe. The second one is the electrode scrap. So these already have the recipe set. So same situation I laid out with the heavy oil residue and the diluted packaged fuel. This first step is underclocked to 75% so that it outputs at 180 alumina solution. The next step takes in 180 alumina solution, and then you also need petroleum coke. This is another alternate recipe. This is my favorite way to do aluminum. So you could definitely switch around the recipes and the clock speeds to fit your needs. But the benefit of this recipe is the way that the pipes work. So let me lay this out for you. These need 150 water. These have an output of 105 water. So these are all paired up so that one refinery loops back and matches up with one refinery. So if that one's going to output at 105 and this one needs 150, that means I'm short 45 water. This valve prevents any backflow so that water coming out of this refinery won't clog up the system, because if this shuts down, everything else in the entire factory will shut down. The reason this pipe has this bend is because of the pipeline junction. And the reason this is angled vertically instead of horizontally is these kind of all compete with each other when it's all flat. However, the way that pipes work in this game is when it's angled vertically, the horizontal pipe has priority over the vertical inputs. Meaning that the water coming from that refinery will have priority over the water that's going to be coming from a water extractor. If the water extractor fills up and shuts off, that just fluctuates your power grid. If that backs up and shuts off, the whole factory shuts down. So with each one of these refineries being short 45 water, that means that I need to plug in 90 water into each one of these blueprints. It also needs 150 bauxite for each one. So when you pair these up, that's 300. So every 2 blueprints, you'll need 600. With the next step, you want to have these laid out just in a straight line, and then you're able to just take the pipe from this one to this one. And then you'll just need to plug in the petroleum coke. And obviously these pipes are lined up already, so you just connect one with the other, and as long as they're not too far apart, you can just do it in one shot. So that is all of the refinery blueprints I have to share with you. I hope this inspires you to create some fun refinery blueprints of your own, or if you decide to use mine, the Google Drive is in the description. I hope they serve you well. If you do find any issues or you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'll be showing off the blenders and manufacturers next, so look forward to that. And thanks for watching.